Good morning, Congresswoman. You were born and raised in Joliet, Illinois. Your parents, Dr. and Mrs. Holman, set a distinct impression on you by caring for others as clinicians and being advocates for the African American community of Illinois. Your father, Dr. Lucien Holman, owned The Black Voice, an African American newspaper, and served as president of the NAACP Illinois chapter. You received your bachelor's degree in political science, and after college you worked as an intern for former Governor Douglas Wilder, the first African American governor of Virginia. When looking at these early data points of your life, one might imagine that the seeds were planted if you wanted a life in public service. Yet you chose a different path, and you relocated to Georgia, became a flight attendant with Delta Airlines, and raised your family. And then 2012 happened. The nation heard the tragic story of your son Jordan, 17 years old, murdered in cold blood by a man who opened fire on the car your son was riding in with friends over an argument about how loud their music was. Here's my question. After your son's tragic death and the court case to bring him some semblance of justice, you made a monumental pivot. You turned your life's direction first to advocacy with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and later back to public service, running for Georgia's 6th congressional district. Is that pivot you made normal, or is that superhuman? What would you say to another parent who has lost a loved one through gun violence, who is busy living their life, but yearns to do more to bring peace and justice to our country and our society?
Well, first I want to thank the Loyola Stands Against Gun Violence group for putting on the 4th Annual Community Advocacy and Violence Prevention Summit. And I want to thank the community leaders and all the elected officials of Proviso Township, and thank all the loved ones of victims of gun violence who are just still coping with this loss. We're always coping with it. And thank you for considering advocacy in memory of them. And in turn of all the things that happened tragically with my family, with Jordan, each and every individual processes their grief differently. Each and every victim processes the loss differently. And so I would say is that what I believe I've been able to accomplish in turning my tragedy into activism and coming to Washington to change the laws that would prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening, I would never say it's superhuman. I would say it's just my way of processing what has happened to me and my family, and what I've learned to see is happening all over the country. And as I continue to work with victims and communities that are really growing in numbers, that are really trying to change the culture of gun violence, I would say that it's just my process and my way of taking all of that concern and love and that I would still be giving to my son if he were alive, and just channeling that through activism, through advocacy, and through work in changing the laws. That is how I am still processing Jordan's death. And it looks different for each and every person.
For many Americans, the U.S. Congress is the ultimate arena where positive, lasting change can take place in our country. Yet, because of the entrenched interests against change, all the sausage making and compromise can sometimes diminish the results for those who demand it. What has your experience working in this battleground of competing interests taught you about how to work across the aisle while remaining committed to being a change agent?
Well, there are a lot of competing interests in terms of a lot of different organizations that are working on gun safety, and each and every one of them has They're each and every one of them has a direct focus, and I'm really excited that now the organizations, whether they be just organizations that are working on movement building with survivors and victims, or whether they're working on changing the laws, working through the judicial system, or they're working legislatively, or whether or not they're working specifically with law enforcement. Each and every one of the organizations that is working on the ground now, and some are very small organizations that are working within communities, and they may not have many resources, and they may not have a lot of manpower, but they're still doing the work. I'm really glad to see organizations all across the country coming together and collaborating together. That is how we've been able to change the laws in some sense, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Law. That's the first monumental legislation we've been able to pass in decades. And that is because of the collaboration and the effort of all the organizations, all of the gun violence survivors and victims and stakeholders that really are on the ground and trying to save as many lives as they can. And this is how we change the culture, and this is how we move forward to save lives.
Is there one particular piece of federal legislation that's on your radar right now?
Well, right now, the assault weapons ban is extremely critical and important. Yes, we have passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Law. Yes, we have closed the boyfriend loophole for domestic violence abusers, making sure that they're not allowed to have access to purchase guns. But we still have a lot of work to do. And a piece of legislation that I will really be focusing on going forward is the assault weapons ban. When we take surveys around the country asking everyday Americans, what are they afraid of? What is the one piece of legislation that they believe, really has to be focused upon, and that legislatively we here in Washington are responsible for banning, and that is assault weapons. The tragedies that we see around the country, the numbers of horrific tragedies in schools and movies and at concerts, these tragedies are happening with the use of assault weapons. And we did ban assault weapons, but we have banned the assault weapons, but that ban has sunsetted. So now we have to make sure that we're passing the legislation again. And so that will be my focus. And also, I'm understanding by talking to everyday people, that is the one piece of legislation that they really want us to champion at this point. So, would love to have your help, would love to have your engagement, and would love to have you on the front lines with me and so many other organizations and individuals that are wanting to save lives.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman McBath. You and your staff have been amazing. Our summit theme is Time to Act, Advocacy Matters. We are all sitting here, community members, civic leaders, and elected officials of Proviso Township, students and researchers of Loyola University, clinicians, and administrative staff of Loyola University Medical Center. You have our ear and our attention right now. What is one deliverable this audience could do today to help our local community? Are there any ways you would recommend for local communities to stay engaged in the fight against gun violence?
Well, first I want to say thank you so much for paying attention. I want to say thank you so much for being engaged. Thank you so much for standing on the front lines. It takes that kind of effort from so many people across the nation to really make effective change. But what I would encourage you to do is continue to build upon the work that you've already done. Continue to expand the ways in which you are affecting change within your community. Continue to speak out, symposiums, roundtable discussions, talking to your local municipal leaders, law enforcement, and yes, your local legislative body. It's really vitally important that we continue to keep the pressure on our elected officials and our municipal leaders, because that's how change happens. Federally, I'm working here to change the laws federally, but most rapidly the change happens within the state, within your own community. So continue to do what you're doing. It really, really matters. I cannot thank you enough for your engagement and your involvement and your vision to really see beyond where we are right here today and really think about the impact that you'll have on the future of gun safety and saving lives in America.